Sir, your wife has stopped breathing. Those were the 7 words that shattered Ethan Walker's world at exactly 9:47 p.m. The strange thing is, when the call came, he almost ignored it. The restaurant glowed with warm amber light. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath hanging chandeliers. Soft jazz drifted through the air, while conversations blended into a comfortable hum. It was the kind of place where people celebrated success, signed million-dollar deals, and pretended life would always stay perfect. Ethan sat at a corner table overlooking downtown Dallas. A half-finished glass of Cabernet rested beside his plate. Across from him sat Vanessa Reed, smiling as she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. To anyone watching, they looked like a happy couple enjoying a quiet evening together. Nobody would have guessed that 3 miles away, Ethan's pregnant wife was lying in an operating room fighting through the most dangerous night of her life. My name is Ethan Walker. At 42 years old, I had everything most men spend their entire lives chasing. A real estate empire spread across Texas. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. A house large enough that some rooms stayed empty for weeks. Luxury cars. Private memberships. Business awards displayed on polished shelves. People called me successful. Some called me unstoppable. Looking back now, I realize success can make a man blind. It can convince him that every problem can wait until tomorrow. That every relationship will still be there when he finally decides to pay attention. Earlier that afternoon, Grace had called me from her prenatal appointment. Her voice sounded tired. She was 36 weeks pregnant with our first child. The doctor wanted additional monitoring. Nothing serious, she said. Just precautions. I remember glancing at my watch while she talked. I was already running late for a meeting. Everything's fine, I told her. Get some rest. I'll be home later. Home later. Funny how those words still echo in my head. Because I never asked how scared she felt. I never asked whether she wanted me there. I just assumed there would be another day. Another conversation. Another chance. By 7 o'clock, I was sitting across from Vanessa instead. She laughed at something I said. I laughed too. My phone vibrated once. Then again. Then 3 more times. I flipped it over without looking. The screen continued lighting up against the tablecloth like a warning signal nobody wanted to acknowledge. Vanessa noticed. Important? She asked. Probably work, I said. It can wait. Outside the restaurant windows, dark clouds gathered over the city skyline. Rain tapped softly against the glass. Somewhere beyond those lights and highways and office towers, Grace was being rushed into emergency surgery. Somewhere, doctors were making decisions measured in seconds instead of hours. Somewhere, people were searching for me. But at that table, surrounded by polished silver and expensive wine, I knew none of it. Not yet. The phone buzzed again. This time it refused to stop. And when I finally looked down at the screen, I saw the hospital's number calling for the 6th time. The number on the screen should have made me move immediately. Instead, I stared at it for almost 3 full seconds. Dallas Memorial Hospital. The same hospital where Grace had spent the last several months attending appointments, collecting ultrasound photos, and preparing for the arrival of our daughter. Vanessa lifted her wine glass and smiled. You were somewhere else tonight, she said. She was right. Even before I answered the call, something felt wrong. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just wrong in the quiet way a house feels different before a storm arrives. I finally pressed accept and held the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and controlled. Hospital voices always are. Mr. Walker, this is Dr. Michael Harris. We need you to come immediately. My stomach tightened. What happened? There was a pause. Just long enough to change everything. Your wife experienced unexpected complications. We are doing everything we can. I pushed back from the table. The restaurant suddenly felt smaller. The music sounded distant. The warm light that had seemed comforting minutes ago now felt artificial. Is she okay? I asked. Another pause. Sir, you need to get here. Now. The line disconnected. For several seconds, I simply stood there holding the phone. Vanessa was saying something, but I barely heard her. The city outside the window blurred into streaks of rain and headlights. Looking back, I wish I could tell you that I ran immediately. I wish I could say I became the husband Grace deserved in that moment. But the truth is uglier than that. Because fear does strange things to people. Sometimes it makes you move. Sometimes it makes you freeze. I stood there trapped between 2 versions of my life. One was sitting across from me in an expensive restaurant. The other was lying in a hospital bed waiting for a man who should have been there hours ago. Grace and I had been married for 9 years. 9 years filled with anniversaries, holidays, business dinners, family gatherings, and promises. Most people saw us as the perfect couple, the self-made millionaire and the woman who stayed beside him through every success. The truth was more complicated. Success had arrived faster than wisdom. My company expanded. My schedule expanded. My ego expanded. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that providing was the same thing as being present. I bought larger houses, better vacations, more expensive gifts. And every time Grace asked for time, I answered with things. She never complained much. That was one of the reasons people loved her. Grace had a way of making everyone feel important. The waitress at a diner, the cashier at a grocery store, the elderly neighbor walking her dog. She remembered birthdays, sent thank you cards, brought homemade cookies to people she barely knew. Even after becoming wealthy, she never acted wealthy. That kindness was one of the first things that attracted me to her. It was also one of the things I slowly began taking for granted. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. My phone vibrated again. This time it was not the hospital. It was Grace's mother, then her sister, then another call from the hospital. And suddenly I realized every second I wasted standing there was a second I could never get back. I do not remember leaving the restaurant. I remember throwing cash onto the table. I remember Vanessa calling my name as I walked away. I remember cold rain hitting my face the second I stepped outside. Everything else blurred together like headlights through a wet windshield. Dallas traffic stretched ahead of me in endless lines of red brake lights. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm, but they could not clear the storm building inside my head. For the first time in years, I was not thinking about contracts, investors, or quarterly reports. I was thinking about Grace. I was thinking about the woman who had spent nearly a decade believing in me when I barely deserved it. The woman who never asked for much. The woman carrying our daughter. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as memories surfaced one after another. Grace standing beside me in a tiny apartment when my first business nearly collapsed. Grace bringing coffee to my office during 16-hour workdays. Grace sitting quietly in hospital waiting rooms after fertility treatments that seemed to lead nowhere. We had spent years hoping for a child. Years of disappointment followed by cautious optimism. Then one spring morning, she walked into our kitchen holding a positive pregnancy test with tears in her eyes. I can still see that smile. Pure joy. Pure hope. She framed the ultrasound photos. She read parenting books. She painted the nursery herself because she wanted every detail to feel personal. While she prepared for our future, I was slowly drifting away from it. Success had changed my schedule, then my priorities, then eventually my character. The affair with Vanessa did not begin with some dramatic moment. It began with convenience. A business event. A few conversations. A series of bad decisions disguised as harmless choices. That is how most disasters start. Nobody wakes up planning to destroy their life. They simply convince themselves that one compromise will not matter. Then another. Then another. Until one day they no longer recognize the person staring back from the mirror. Rain hammered against the roof of the car as I exited the freeway. My phone rang again. This time it was Grace's sister, Emily. I answered immediately. She sounded exhausted. Her voice cracked halfway through my name. "Where are you?" she asked. "I am almost there," I said. "How is Grace?" Silence answered first, then a shaky breath. "Just get here." The call ended before I could ask anything else. My stomach dropped. The hospital appeared ahead through the rain, glowing white against the darkness. Ambulances sat near the entrance. Nurses moved quickly beneath covered walkways. Families stood near windows clutching coffee cups and silent prayers. Hospitals have a unique kind of quiet. Even when they are busy, everything feels suspended between hope and fear. I parked crookedly and ran toward the entrance. Water soaked my suit. My dress shoes slipped against the pavement. None of it mattered, because somewhere inside that building, the life I had been taking for granted was hanging by a thread. And I still had no idea that Grace had left something behind that would change everything I thought I knew about our marriage. The emergency room door slid open, and a wave of cold air met me as I stepped inside. Everything smelled like disinfectant, coffee, and exhaustion. Emily was the first person I saw. Grace's younger sister stood near the waiting area clutching a paper cup she had clearly forgotten to drink from. The moment she looked at me, something in her expression changed. Not anger, not relief, disappointment. Somehow that hurt more. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. I opened my mouth, but no answer sounded good enough. Not business dinner, not traffic, not anything. She looked away before I could speak. A few feet behind her sat Grace's mother, Helen. The strongest woman I knew looked 10 years older than she had that morning. Her eyes were red from crying. She stood slowly and stared at me for several long seconds. "She kept asking for you," Helen said. The words landed harder than any accusation. "She kept asking for you. Not where are you? Not why are you late? Just asking for me." I lowered my eyes. For years I had convinced myself that being successful made me a good husband. Standing there beneath fluorescent lights, I realized how little my bank account mattered. Dr. Harris appeared moments later. His blue scrubs were wrinkled. Fatigue lined his face. He extended his hand. "Mr. Walker." I shook it. "How is she?" He exhaled slowly. "The next few hours are critical. Right now we are monitoring both mother and baby very closely." The hallway seemed to tilt for a second. "Can I see her?" I asked. "Not yet." He paused. "There is something else." My chest tightened. Dr. Harris reached into a folder tucked beneath his arm. "Your wife brought this with her today." He handed me a large white envelope. My name was written across the front in Grace's handwriting. Clean, careful, familiar. I stared at it without moving. "What is it?" I asked. "She left instructions that it be given to you if anything unexpected happened." The envelope suddenly felt heavier than paper should. Dr. Harris excused himself and disappeared down the corridor. Nobody spoke. The waiting room television played silently overhead. Rain tapped against distant windows. Somewhere a machine beeped steadily. Life continued moving while mine stood completely still. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter. Behind it sat several photographs. The first photograph showed Grace standing in the nursery beside a white crib. She was smiling. One hand rested gently on her stomach. The second showed a tiny pink outfit hanging on the closet door. The third was an ultrasound image framed with handwritten notes. Tears blurred my vision before I even unfolded the letter. Because suddenly I understood something terrible. While I had been investing my energy into another life, Grace had been building a future she believed we would share together. And as I carefully opened the first page, I had no idea that the words waiting inside were about to break whatever remained of the man I used to be. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter. The paper carried the faint scent of Grace's favorite lavender stationery, the kind she always bought from a small boutique near our neighborhood. For a moment, I could not bring myself to read. I simply stared at the first line while the sounds of the hospital faded into the background. Then I began. "Dear Ethan, if you are reading this, something did not go according to plan." I stopped breathing for a second. The words were simple, but they felt impossibly heavy. "First, do not blame yourself for being scared. I know you better than anyone. You always act strong when everyone is watching, but fear has a way of finding you when you are alone." My throat tightened. Grace had written that days earlier, maybe weeks. Yet somehow she understood exactly how I felt sitting in that waiting room. I kept reading. "I hope none of this is necessary. I hope we are both laughing about how dramatic I was while our daughter keeps us awake at 3 in the morning. But if life surprises us, there are things I want you to know." The next sentence nearly destroyed me. "Thank you for giving me the happiest years of my life." I lowered the letter and stared at the floor. Happiness. That was the word she chose. Not disappointment. Not frustration. Not sacrifice. Happiness. While I had been making choices that would have broken her heart, she was sitting somewhere writing about gratitude. I continued reading through blurred eyes. She wrote about the first apartment we shared, the old sofa we bought from a thrift store, the road trip through Colorado where our car overheated and we spent the afternoon laughing beside a gas station. She remembered details I had forgotten years ago, moments I had traded for meetings, deadlines, and business deals. Then the letter shifted. "I cannot wait for our daughter to meet you. She is going to adore you. You pretend to be tough, but I have seen your heart. I have seen the man who stops to help strangers change flat tires. I have seen the man who secretly buys Christmas gifts for families who need them. I hope she grows up with your determination and your kindness." I pressed my hand against my mouth, because the man she described felt like someone I used to know, someone I had slowly abandoned. Tucked behind the final page was another folded note. Smaller, Newer. Written in the same careful handwriting. On the front it simply said, "For our daughter." I unfolded it carefully. Inside was a message Grace had written to the baby. A welcome letter filled with hopes, dreams, and promises. Near the end, one sentence caught my attention. "Your father loves you more than he realizes right now." I read it twice. Then a third time. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. Because Grace believed in me even when I had stopped deserving it. She believed in the husband I was supposed to be, the father I was supposed to become. And as I sat there holding those pages, completely broken by her faith in me, I noticed something else inside the envelope. A photograph I had not seen before. It had been taken just 2 days earlier. Grace stood in the nursery, smiling beside the crib. But when I turned the photograph over, I discovered a handwritten note on the back that changed everything. The note on the back of the photograph was written in blue ink, slightly slanted the way Grace always wrote when she was excited. I turned the picture over and read the single sentence. "No matter what happens, choose our daughter every time." That was it. 12 words. 12 simple words that somehow carried the weight of an entire life. I stared at them while the waiting room around me disappeared. Choose our daughter every time. Not choose success. Not choose money. Not choose pride. Just our daughter. The heartbreaking part was that Grace believed she needed to write that reminder at all. Somewhere deep inside, she must have sensed the distance growing between us. Maybe she noticed the late nights that never quite made sense. Maybe she saw the way my attention drifted during conversations. Maybe she felt the loneliness I kept pretending did not exist. Yet even then, she was thinking about our child instead of herself. I looked down at the photograph again. The nursery was finished. White crib. Pale pink blanket folded neatly across the side. A rocking chair in the corner beside a bookshelf already filled with children's stories. Grace had built that room one careful detail at a time. I had barely spent 10 minutes inside it. Every memory felt like an accusation. Every detail reminded me of something I had missed. The waiting room clock moved past midnight. Nurses walked through the corridor carrying clipboards and cups of coffee. Families sat beneath fluorescent lights, hoping for good news. I was no different now. The only difference was that most of them had arrived when they were needed. I arrived after. My phone vibrated in my pocket. For a moment, I thought it might be Dr. Harris. Instead, Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. 5 missed calls. Then 6. Then another text message. I did not open it. I simply stared at her name. Hours earlier, seeing it would have made me smile. Now it felt like a reminder of everything I had nearly thrown away. I silenced the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The choice felt small, almost meaningless. But for the first time in months, I was not choosing convenience. I was not choosing escape. I was not choosing the version of myself that had been drifting further from home. A movement at the end of the hallway caught my attention. Dr. Harris was walking toward us. Every conversation in the waiting area seemed to fade. Helen stood immediately. Emily rose beside her. I remained seated for a second because suddenly my legs felt weak. The doctor's expression was impossible to read. Not hopeful, not defeated, just tired. He stopped in front of us and removed his glasses. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Finally, he looked directly at me. "Mr. Walker," he said quietly, "there has been a development." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Is Grace okay?" The doctor hesitated. It was only a second, maybe less. But that hesitation stretched longer than any minute I had ever lived. Then he reached into the folder beneath his arm and pulled out something unexpected. It was not another medical report. It was a photograph. And the moment I saw what was in that picture, I realized Grace knew far more than I ever imagined. The photograph looked ordinary at first. It showed the entrance of a restaurant in downtown Dallas. Rain glistened on the sidewalk beneath the glow of streetlights. People moved in and out of the frame carrying umbrellas. Then my eyes found the 2 figures standing near the valet stand. Me and Vanessa. The picture slipped slightly in my hands. For a moment I thought I was looking at something impossible. Dr. Harris watched quietly while I stared at the image. "What is this?" I asked. My voice barely sounded like my own. "Your wife gave that to the nursing staff earlier this evening," he said. "She asked that it remain with her personal belongings." My chest tightened. I turned the photograph over. There was another handwritten note. This one was shorter than the others. Much shorter. "The truth always arrives before excuses." I read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Every word landed like a stone. Grace knew. Somehow she knew. Not every detail, perhaps. Not every conversation. But enough. Enough to recognize that the marriage she believed in was not the same marriage I had been living. Suddenly, dozens of small moments from the previous months came rushing back. Questions she never finished asking. Long silences during dinner. The way she sometimes studied my face when she thought I was not looking. I had mistaken her quietness for ignorance. In reality, she had been carrying knowledge I never imagined. Helen covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Emily looked away toward the window. Neither woman seemed surprised by the photograph. That realization hurt almost as much as the picture itself. How long? I asked quietly. Emily finally answered. Long enough. The words were not angry. Somehow that made them worse. Angry people still hope to change your mind. Disappointed people have already accepted who you are. I lowered myself into a chair. The waiting room felt colder than before. Across the hall, a janitor pushed a cleaning cart beneath fluorescent lights. Somewhere a newborn cried briefly before the sound disappeared behind closed doors. Life continued all around me, yet everything inside me seemed frozen in place. I thought about Grace writing those letters, organizing those photographs, preparing for possibilities she prayed would never happen. She had walked into the hospital carrying fear, uncertainty, and disappointment. Still, every page she left behind was filled with kindness. Not revenge, not bitterness, kindness. I was trying to process that impossible contrast when Dr. Harris's pager vibrated. He glanced down immediately. His expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The kind of subtle shift that hospital families learn to fear. He looked up and adjusted his glasses. Mr. Walker, he said carefully, I have some news. Every muscle in my body tightened. Helen grabbed Emily's hand. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. For several seconds, the only sound came from the humming lights above us. Then Dr. Harris finally smiled for the first time all night. And the next words out of his mouth changed everything. Both of them are alive. The words echoed through the waiting room like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Nobody moved at first. It was as if our minds needed a few seconds to catch up with what our hearts had just heard. Then Helen began crying quietly. Emily wrapped her arms around her mother. I closed my eyes and released a breath I felt like I had been holding for years instead of hours. Alive. Grace was alive. Our daughter was alive. For the first time that night, hope entered the room. Dr. Harris explained that there would still be recovery ahead. Monitoring, rest, careful observation. But the immediate danger had passed. I listened to every word while barely hearing any of them. My mind kept returning to the same simple fact. I had almost lost everything that mattered. And I had nearly done it without even being there. Can I see her? I asked. Dr. Harris nodded. For a few minutes. The walk down the hallway felt longer than the drive across Dallas. Every step carried the weight of the letters, the photographs, and the truths I could no longer avoid. Hospital lights reflected softly against polished floors. Nurses moved quietly between rooms. Somewhere nearby, a newborn cried before settling again. Life. Everywhere I looked, life. When we finally reached Grace's room, my heart began pounding so hard I could hear it. Dr. Harris opened the door and stepped aside. Grace was resting against white pillows. She looked exhausted, pale, fragile, yet somehow stronger than anyone I had ever known. Beside her sat a clear bassinet. Inside, wrapped in a pink blanket, was the smallest person I had ever seen. Our daughter. I took one step into the room and stopped. Emotion closed around my throat. Grace slowly turned her head toward me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no tears, just silence. The kind of silence that exists when two people finally stand face to face with the truth. Her eyes moved briefly toward the bassinet, then back to me. She is beautiful, I whispered. Grace nodded softly. She is. I looked at my daughter again. Tiny fingers, tiny breaths. A whole future resting inside a hospital bassinet. The future Grace had been protecting while I was busy risking it. Grace, I began. The apology was already forming. The explanations. The regret. Every speech I wished I had prepared years earlier. But Grace gently shook her head. Not angry. Not cruel. Just tired. I know, she said quietly. 3 words. Nothing more. Yet somehow they carried the weight of everything. I know. She knew about Vanessa. She knew about the lies. She knew about the distance. She knew far more than I ever realized. And despite all of it, She had still filled those letters with kindness. That realization hurt more than any accusation could have. Grace looked toward our daughter again. A faint smile touched her face. Then she spoke the sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. Now it is your turn to decide who you want to be. The answer to Grace's question did not come that night. It did not come the next morning either. Some decisions are too important to make with words. They have to be made with actions repeated day after day until they become part of who you are. The weeks that followed felt different from any period of my life. For the first time in years, I stopped measuring success by numbers on reports and balances in accounts. I measured it by feeding a baby at 3 in the morning, by sitting beside a hospital bed holding Grace's hand when she was too exhausted to speak, by learning how to be present instead of merely available. Recovery was slow. Some days Grace seemed stronger. Other days she looked tired beyond words. Through it all, she remained polite, kind, grateful even. But something fundamental had changed between us. Trust, once broken, does not return because someone apologizes. It returns only if it returns at all. I ended things with Vanessa the day after leaving the hospital. There was no dramatic confrontation, no argument, just a conversation that should have happened months earlier. When it ended, I walked away knowing I had closed one chapter of my life and stepped into another. Whether that new chapter would include Grace was no longer my decision alone. Months passed. Our daughter, Lily Walker, grew from a tiny newborn into a smiling baby who seemed determined to charm every person she met. She inherited Grace's eyes. Every time she looked at me, I felt both gratitude and responsibility. Grace eventually returned home, but our marriage did not magically heal. We attended counseling. We had difficult conversations, long silences, honest discussions that should have happened years earlier. Some nights we made progress. Other nights we seemed miles apart. Through it all, I remembered the sentence written on the back of that photograph. The truth always arrives before excuses. So I stopped making excuses. 1 year later, Lily celebrated her first birthday in our backyard. Family gathered beneath strings of lights. Children ran across the lawn. Music played softly from speakers near the patio. Grace stood beside the birthday cake holding Lily while everyone sang. I watched them from across the yard and felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because everything was perfect. It was not. Some scars remained. Some questions still had no easy answers. But peace comes when a person finally stops running from the truth. As the evening ended, Grace walked over carrying Lily. She handed our daughter to me and smiled softly. It was not the smile from our early years. It was something different, something wiser, harder-earned, more real. She adores you, Grace said. I looked down at Lily as she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine. Then I looked back at Grace. I am still trying to become the man you believed I could be, I said. Grace nodded slowly. That is all any of us can do. The lights glowed against the dark Texas sky. Laughter drifted across the yard. And standing there with my daughter in my arms, I finally understood what Grace had known all along. The most valuable things in life are never the things we own. They are the people who trust us with their hearts. And if we are lucky enough to get a second chance, we should spend the rest of our lives proving we deserved it.